Chrono Odyssey is being advertised as a next-generation MMORPG with awe-inspiring visuals and a seamless open world. Over the past few years, trailers have come out for the game, including trailers that show gameplay, which you can see on the screen right now, and these got myself and many others excited for this upcoming MMO. And recently, we actually got a chance to play Chrono Odyssey publicly. There was a closed beta test that ran for 3 days on Steam, and me, and likely a bunch of you guys watching this video, got a chance to try out the game for the first time. And to summarize, I think the general takeaway was people were pretty disappointed or underwhelmed with what they got to play versus what the trailers believed we'd be playing. Now, I personally put more than 60 hours into this playtest and tried my best to thoroughly test all aspects of the game, or at least what was available in the beta. My quick review? Well, let's start with the positives. I do like some things in Chrono Odyssey. I thought the boss fights were pretty cool. There was a fairly decent amount of enemy variety, outside of that one guy with the punching attacks that they reused like 10 times. Open world exploration felt fairly rewarding, with lots of beacons and labyrinths and chests and resources all over the place, and the gathering and crafting system felt pretty good as well. But unfortunately, all of this was heavily overshadowed by many technical core issues with the game. By this, I mean the lighting, the movement, the animations, the graphics, just how it feels to interact with your character. It all felt quite unpleasant. And before some of you guys rush to the comments, I know and have seen the statement that we were playing on an older build of Chrono Odyssey. For those of you not aware, what the devs pushed out for this initial playtest was a version of the game that they finalized, I believe, sometime around the end of 2024. Why they would do this and not go with something more recent is supposedly due to the fact that this is the most stable build they had for the purpose of server stress testing, and this build also had the least amount of critical bugs. The devs, or particularly the founder of Chrono Odyssey, has stated that the next closed beta will be significantly more satisfying than the version that we just played. I think a bunch of you guys, myself included, have a fair degree of skepticism when it comes to this information, but I will say I genuinely hope this is true. I know the start of this video has probably come across as quite negative, but I really would like Chrono Odyssey to succeed and be the amazing next generation MMORPG the trailers had us believe it would be. The last attempt that we saw at a game developer trying this modern action combat MMO was, in my opinion, New World. Now, I know you guys are gonna say, here we go, Baggins with his New World propaganda, with his New World content, he's gonna glaze New World now. No, that is not the purpose of this video. But the connections between Chrono and New World are pretty undeniable. Many UI elements, the crafting and gathering. I mean, it was even uncovered that they were considering adding New World's war and territory system at one point, as they left an identical copy of an Amazon Games artist's war fort model in the game, albeit it was behind the wall that was supposed to restrict players from getting access to the rest of the map. Now, whilst the devs have since confirmed that this content will no longer be available in future versions of the game, and obviously it wasn't supposed to be viewed since they placed it outside the playable area of the map, it seems pretty undeniable that Chrono Odyssey has been looking at New World for inspiration when it comes to designing their game. And I personally don't view this as a bad thing. I'm all for game developers trying to take the bones of what made New World popular during its release, tweaking it to make it their own, and delivering it in a far less buggy and much more content-rich version. Although, to be clear, direct plagiarism isn't cool, but I'll give the developers the benefit of the doubt that they weren't just planning to ship an identical copy of New World's assets, rather just seeing if the concept would work in their game. The point that I'm trying to get to here is I feel like I'm seeing history repeat itself. When New World came out in beta, many players, myself included, fell in love with the game. But there was a good chunk of players who said that the game was unpolished, janky, definitely not ready for release. The players who were head over heels in love with the game and excited for a new, revolutionary, modern-day MMO dismissed those naysayers as haters. And I know, because I was there, in that camp. I was so addicted to New World during release that I convinced myself everything was fine and that people were just being overly negative and hating just for the sake of it. But clearly, over time, we have learned who was right and who was wrong. So for those of you who enjoyed the Chrono Odyssey beta and found some fun in the gameplay like I did, I urge you not to just mindlessly glaze the game and dismiss all criticism. There is clearly a lot of work that needs to be done if we want this game to be successful in the long term, and not just dismissed as New World from Temu like it's currently being labeled. Again, as the founder suggests, the next beta might fix the majority of issues players faced in the initial playtest. But if that is the case, it begs the question, why didn't the devs just work on their more polished internal version, give it greater server stability, and then push that out for the initial beta? They'll obviously be working to some kind of timeline, and I know game dev is not as simple as just fix everything and get it all perfect first time, but first impressions in games are insanely important. And I worry that whoever made the executive decision to push this out as the beta is at least a little bit naive to think that it would be well received based on the preconceived notions of what we saw from the game in the trailers. Now that I've got my initial thoughts out of the way, I was going to use this part of the video to give an extensive review of all the content that was available in the first beta and give feedback and critique on what was and wasn't working for me. However, it kind of feels like a waste of mine and your guys' time, considering that the upcoming second beta is supposed to much more closely resemble the game's current state of development. So instead, let's discuss some more overall features I felt the game was missing, instead of things like performance being abysmal, lighting being jank, you know, the really obvious stuff that developers have said they're already aware of. One of the first and most concerning issues I saw that isn't being widely discussed is the servers. The playtest peaked at around 65,000 concurrent. And in order to hold this capacity and prevent long login queues, they expanded the total number of servers per region quite dramatically. Europe, for example, started off with just 6 servers, but as player numbers increased, they ended up having somewhere in the region of 50 to 70 total servers. And that's, again, just for Europe. This was the same solution Amazon had during the release of New World. Because a server could only hold a relatively small number of players, they had to constantly spin up new servers to accommodate the player count. Without any transfer options, cross-server queuing, or layering, this was a massive issue for New World as it divided communities, preventing friends from playing with each other, and constant server merges were needed over the next 3 years to keep decent populations as the player numbers declined. From this beta, it does look like Chrono Odyssey could be making the same mistake. We don't know what the max server capacity is for this MMO, but I can only assume it's quite low based on them 10xing the amount of servers from the start to the end of the beta. This could be something that's addressed when the game progresses, but I do think it should be 100% solved before the launch of Chrono Odyssey. Another glaring issue to me was the lack of any queuable activities or matchmaking. There was one dungeon in this beta, the Howling Pits, and if you wanted to enter, you'd have to make a party or join somebody else's from this screen that you see here. You could complete the dungeon solo, I did a couple times, but that's besides the point. There was no way to filter by activity that you're interested in. When it came to finding or joining groups, the only way you could indicate what content you had your group set up for was by changing the group's name. Now, not to sound like a broken record, but this is also the same state that New World launched in. Physically walking to the entrance of a dungeon, setting up a party, advertising in chat, there was just zero quality of life or automation when it came to try, doing instance content. I get Chrono Odyssey might want to do things differently, or perhaps take a more old school approach to the dungeons, but outside of classic vanilla WoW, every successful MMO that's still going gives players the quality of life to click a button and queue up for instance content like dungeons. Even New World eventually implemented it, and in my opinion, Chrono Odyssey definitely should too. PvP is also another area where I have big concerns for this game. My understanding is that Chrono Odyssey is supposed to be much more heavily focused on PvE, but I do think the simple addition of a 3v3 arena or some kind of battleground with an objective like King of the Hill or Capture the Flag, it would go a long way for this game. I think so many developers these days have an obsession with marrying PvE and PvP content together and making it a significant part of progression in the end game. Dune Awakening is a very recent example of this. The Deep Desert is somewhere a good chunk of PvEers don't want to go, and PvPers often can't find the PvP they want, because most players in the region are just there for the resources rather than specifically because it's a PvP flagged area. Chrono Odyssey announced that they will have a PvEVP zone called Eden as their pinnacle PvP content. And again, I think this is just going to frustrate the PvEers and not give that pure PvP experience that certain players crave. So please, Chrono Dev team, give PvPers their own specific content that is entirely focused on PvP. I'm not against the idea of Eden, it sounds pretty cool to me, but if that's the only real PvP content we can engage in outside of flagging up and duels, and if PvE players are going to feel forced to engage in Eden for the loot it gives, I think you're just going to polarize the player base. Finally, the last thing I wanted to include in this video is talking talking about the character creation. I was debating whether I really want to include this, as I don't really care too much, and I know it's just for fun, but Chrono Odyssey clearly wants to portray itself as a dark and gritty MMO. As in the first 10 minutes of the game, you see people getting decapitated, impaled, there's swearing and fire and blood and gore, and a narrative where you need to go back in time and save the world from the void. And then, after all of this epic, dramatic sort of storyline, you arrive in the shared open world, you can be instantly greeted by an 8-foot-tall neon green monstrosity with bodily proportions that are just completely insane. Which I think just kind of offsets, the whole sort of epic, dark, gritty fantasy as soon as you see one of these characters. Now, it does look like the craziness of the character creator is something that is not going to change in future versions of Chrono. According to their founder, he wants to keep the level of customization we had in the access in the beta. He wants to keep that going forward. Again, I care way less about this than everything else I mentioned in the video, but I thought it was important enough that I wanted to get your guys' opinions on this. The character creator, do you guys think it's fine as it is, or would you like to see things toned down just a little bit? Anyway, friends, I think that pretty much does it for this video. I do hope the next beta shows significant improvements to lighting, camera, movement, animations, just the overall quality of the game. The founder has stated that time is on their side, and implied we'll be seeing betas go into a second phase, third phase, and perhaps even more. From what I've heard though, the planned release date for this game is, or was, sometime towards the end of 2025, but perhaps that will be pushed back. This kind of language in his tweet with Baldur's Gate 3 having 3 years of early access sort of implies that, but we'll have to see. I've already fairly extensively covered content on one failing MMO, and I really don't want to have my heart broken again, so whilst I plan to play and review the second beta, if there aren't any signs of massive improvement there, I really don't think it'll be worth following Chrono Odyssey, at least for me personally. Of course, this is just my opinion, and I would like to hear your guys. What do you think about this beta and about the game so far? Do you think you're going to try the second beta, or have you already made your mind up from the first impressions? Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys all in the next video.